I'm Anna Webb. Welcome to A Dog's Life. Hey, Mr. Binks. You know how excited I was when I met Lucy Meggeson doing Joanne Good's Chewing the Fat the other night, because Lucy Meggeson has a cat, a Bengal named Johnny Depp. Well, we're jumping on Zoom now to catch up with Lucy and find out a bit more about Johnny Depp, her cat. Lucy Meggeson, oh, what a delight it is that you're on A Dog's Life.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna. I hope that your listeners are going to be okay with someone who has a cat rather than a dog, but we'll get there in a sec, won't we? I'm sure.
No, we definitely will. And no, I think loads of my listeners also have cats, as well as dogs. And
Yeah.
cats are amazing beings. And everybody knows that my dear Gremlin, who was partly a dog in a way because he was raised by my first miniature bull terrier, Molly, and it was quite an extraordinary relationship that they shared, that he was very dog-like, but he was my first ever cat, so I must say I raised him like a dog. And I was thinking about this last night, I'd call him from the moment he moved in with. Anyway, let's not talk about Gremlin. Lucy, explain yourself and who you are. And I'm honoured to have been on your podcast.
Well, I was so happy to have you on mine. And just to give the listeners a bit of background about who the hell is this woman. So you and I met on the fabulous Joe Good, our mutual friends, radio show on her chewing the fat feature. So that's how we met. And Joe was like, oh my God, you guys have got to kind of, meet. And that's where I asked if you'd come on my podcast, because I have so my name is Lucy Meggeson. I have a podcast called Spinsterhood Reimagined, which is all about being single and child-free, but more than that, it's about celebrating all the fabulous things about being single and not having kids. And it's also got a real element to it that is all about personal growth and sort of self-development. And essentially, I like to sort of inspire and encourage single women to basically, become the best version of themselves that they possibly can. Because let's face it, us and, Anna, you're obviously single and child-free as well. We have that extra time, we have that extra freedom to be able to kind of become the best version of ourselves. So that's who I am and what I do. And I also work part-time in a coffee shop as well, just local to where I live. And of course, I have a cat called Johnny Depp, which is why I'm here.
It's brilliant. And the fact that your cat is named Johnny Depp, it really tickled my sense of humor because of my infamous Johnny Depp story, which I'm sure has been recounted on my own podcast. But if not, go to Lucy's episode with me on, and then I do recount it all in detail, don't I, Lucy?
You do, and oh my God, it's just such a brilliant story. I mean, we were talking about video clips earlier, and I put the video clip of that story out on my Instagram because it was just so brilliant. And of course, it's just so hilarious that my cat's called Johnny Depp. And in fact, when Jo first found out that my cat was called Johnny Depp, I think it really tickled her as well. So it was all very, this is the universe. We're meant to know each other. And it's funny because I grew up loving Johnny Depp, and when I got my Johnny Depp, it was just over a year ago. So it was in the couple of months leading up to me getting him. It was the whole Johnny and Amber trial, and I was very much Team Johnny. So I decided then that I was going to call my cat Johnny Depp because I knew I was getting a little boy. So that's why.
Well, it's brilliant. Well, gosh, I was so hooked to the trial and everything, and definitely also on Team Johnny's side. Yeah, it was so funny, actually, because I described Gremlin, my cat, to a friend before he passed. I said, no, what you got to remember is if Gremlin were human, he would be Johnny Depp. But then I thought, but Gremlin's castrated, so maybe not totally.
I know. Well, my Johnny has too.
Yes, well, you have to really with cats. Do you know what I mean?
Especially outdoor ones like mine is, but we'll get onto that, no doubt.
Yes, no, we will. We will indeed. But
Mhm.
Lucy, it's interesting, this whole spinsterhood thing, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
and it's interesting to me that you got Johnny just a year ago, really. Because
Yeah.
me, I took on a pet rather than having a baby when I was 37, when my dad had just died. And that was Molly, my first miniature bull terrier. And that Moles and me, we had the best journey ever, really. So
Yeah.
much happened in her 13 years. And
Oh.
for me, yeah, but for me, I don't know, for loads of reasons, this having children aspect of life has never really actually bleeped on my radar. Now, Lucy, I don't know if that's the same with you. I mean, for me, I'd much rather have a dog.
Well, I hear you. Well, it's funny because it was not quite the same for me, in as much as whilst I obviously have a podcast that celebrates not having kids, but I'm one of those women. I think people assume that you're either childless because you wanted a kid but couldn't, or you're child free because you never wanted one. But there's also this thing that, now that I'm in this kind of single child free world, there's a term called childless by circumstance. And that is how I describe myself, because I'm one of those girls who I always assumed that I would have kids, but I think that was more because it's just what people do, quote unquote. It's what people do. So, but I remember when I was at school, for example, I was never that girl who was really, really broody. Like so many of my friends, they would talk about their broodiness, and, going kind of in, from our late teens into our 20s, people were talking about being broody. And I could never, I just never resonated with me. I was like, what is this broodiness that people are talking about? I just didn't feel it. And anyway, to cut a very long story short, then I sort of had, relationship after relationship after relationship, as you do throughout my kind of 20s and 30s. And then I ended up in a relationship when I was just before I turned 40. And of course, during my sort of late 30s, whilst all of my friends had started having kids and, getting married and all of this kind of stuff, and there was a part of me thinking, oh gosh, like where am I going? What am I doing? But again, I was always motivated by other things than babies. And all I can say is that if I had really truly wanted a baby, I could have made it happen, and I didn't. So it was just it never felt like my calling. I felt like other things were my calling, and here I am doing a podcast about being single and not having kids. So yeah, I wasn't it wasn't that I didn't want them, it's just that I didn't end up having them. And I've gone, and ironically, when having never been broody for my entire adult life, the minute I hit 40 pretty much, my body just went, oh my God, you need to have a child. And I felt that sort of really physical broodiness that I'd never experienced before. It was very, very bizarre. And I still am kind of going through that. So there has been a bit of a kind of a grief process, although I wouldn't want to say grief in the same way that somebody who really wanted babies would feel grief. But it's been a bit of a journey. But yeah, that's pretty much where I am. But now, of course, I bloody love it, and really lean into all the fabulous things about not having kids.
Well, I'd hope that culture's changing a little bit on all of this. I do think it is social pressure almost that creates all that broodiness. It's the way you're supposed to behave around someone having a baby in the family, and so much attention's on the baby, and this baby looks gorgeous, and but I would think, oh no. And then, Anna, would you like to hold the baby? I'll go, no, no, thank you. I'll probably drop it, no, and I'd always decline. And then, sort of go and find the dog in the family and just hang out and play a game of fetch or something with the dog in the garden. I'd feel far more comfortable. And so it's interesting, isn't it? It's just
Yeah.
interesting. 'Cause, I like people enough. I just find the human condition is a bit disappointing. Understatement. But the interest and the intrigue of humans and their psyche is something I'm interested in, and it's good to see the good in people, although sometimes it can be quite a scary world navigating humans. I don't know, what do you think, Lucy?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. You're so right. Although what I will say is that because I've been on a pretty major I refer to it as like a sort of a spiritual journey, almost like a spiritual awakening. But I'm sort of loath to use that phrase because I think people start rolling their eyes and going, "Oh my God, she's clearly bonkers talking about spiritually awakening." But what I mean is that I think that the worlds of sort of spirituality, not religion, but spirituality and personal growth, they kind of just mesh together. You sort of can't have one without the other. At least I found that. And so in the last, during the last few years that I have been on this kind of journey of self-growth and discovery and all the rest of it, I guess I've started to look through a very different lens at the world. So I suppose I've become a lot less cynical and a lot more hopeful about humanity than I used to be. And whilst obviously there's so much going on in the world that isn't good, I really find that it depends where you're looking, what you're placing your focus on, who you're talking to, who you're following. I mean, I talk a lot about this on the podcast. I am obsessive about the content that I allow into my mind, and the people that I surround myself with, because we become I'm sure you've heard this, Anna, we become the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. God knows who said that originally, but many people have said it over the years, and I really believe that. So I just find that the way that I feel about and therefore relate to humans is very much dependent on how I'm feeling about myself and about the world. And I think I've become more, ironically, because the world is, many people would say that the world is going to, but I've sort of begun to see it in a very different way, again, because of where I'm placing my focus. So for example, I no longer watch or listen to the news, and that can really make people raise their eyebrows and go, bloody hell, she doesn't listen to the news. What kind of a woman is this? But it doesn't mean that I don't know what's going on, because I live in the world. So of course I know what's going on. And B, it doesn't mean that I don't care. It just means that I don't sit and watch the news for 2 hours and get completely embroiled in a story or something really, really, really awful that is going on in the world. Because ultimately, the way that I see it is that the better we feel about ourselves, the better we show up for the people that we love. And that's actually the best thing that we can do for ourselves and on another level for the kind of greater good of humanity, if that isn't a bit too wow, man. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. I mean, I dip into the news. I've got the radio on all the time, and hear it, get what's going on. But absolutely, I mean, there's very little anyone can really do when there's a mass disaster like at the moment in Hawaii. It's absolutely horrendous. But,
it really is.
Yeah, but I can't particularly do anything. I could donate. I would donate to help the animals out there, would be my first. And I have done that over the years, just to think, okay, I've done something when there's been a big natural disaster.
Yeah.
Well, there's always the animals that are also being affected, so that's just the way I go on it. But I do hear what you're saying. I mean, it is important to feel good about yourself. I mean, I love helping people, and you do too, I think, Lucy.
I think, yeah, for sure. And I think it sort of feels quite inherent. I mean, I suppose when I started the podcast, I didn't consciously think I want to do this to help people, but I suppose it was just sort of an inherent motivation for doing it. And I mean, I like to think that really we all want to help people ultimately. Do you know what I mean? I think most people, because, and that, again, going back to the human condition and what humans are like. I mean, I like to think that most people are good underneath it all, but then actually I think we're all a combination of everything, aren't we? Like, nobody is one thing or the other. Nobody is completely good, nobody is completely bad. We all have such a mixture of states and parts. But yes, I mean, I think really humans, when you kind of peel back the layers ultimately of all the societal, can I swear on this podcast? Can I say the word crap?
Yes, I think you can.
When we sort of peel back all the layers of crap that we've all taken on, underneath it all, we're just souls having a human experience, and everybody actually wants to help other people. I think that is our inherent condition. underneath, as I say, all the layers that have been put upon us since we were kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's all, I mean, I remember on the podcast I did with you, you know, your podcast, I kept going back to, you see, conditioning, you see, Lucy, it all goes back to dog training. And in a way, through everything that you're saying, you see, I see the dog as, you know, dogs weaving their way through mankind for all of the time that we've been around as humans. Yeah. Dogs have been with us, which, you know, for me personally, I just find so fascinating. And this link with animals is something I really respect in people, I must say, because that's kind of how I was brought up. And really, yeah, you know, and it's horses for courses. Some people, you know, and other people are never going to get on, you know, really. But again, it is about trying to do the best that you can for other people in your, as you were saying earlier, actually, Lucy, off air, in your kind of community.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know, Anna, one thing when you said just now about sort of dogs having always been there, you know, sort of intertwined with human life as well, that the really interesting thing is that I think one of the best things about animals, and I certainly, gosh, you know, I'm getting this through having a cat, but animals, I think they help us to see the good in ourselves and other people, because they're just this sort of raw innocence, completely. I think that one of the most amazing things about animals, and certainly how I feel about having my cat, is that he makes me really present. And I think that's something that, you know, everybody's talking about mindfulness these days. I think people are just probably sick of hearing the word mindfulness, but it's something I'm try to be mindful of, is being mindful, because it's so incredibly important for us to actually be present. And one of the best things, and I'm sure you'll agree, Anna, is that, you know, when you have a pet, when you have, whether it's a dog or a cat or a horse or whatever, when you're with that animal, you are just present in that moment. Hopefully you're not sort of scrolling on your phone. And actually, one of the most hilarious things about my cat, we'll get on to Johnny in a minute, but one of the most hilarious things that he does, and it's so interesting, and he makes me think, because he is a Bengal and he has a big personality. He's probably the most high maintenance cat on the planet, I think, but he's also completely amazing. I'm completely in love with him. But when I'm on my phone, or if I'm on my phone or my laptop for too long, and he is like, she's been on it for too long, he will literally come up to me in my face and meow so loudly, like, get off your freaking phone, woman. And it's really interesting, because it actually makes me think, you know what, he's right. It's, you know, it's the same as having a toddler coming up to you and saying, you know, mummy, why are you on your phone? So I think that's one of the most amazing things about, you know, having a pet, is that they allow you to be much more present to just the here and now. And ultimately, that's all, you know, that's all we've got, is the here and now. All we've got is this moment right here, right now. We're constantly thinking about the past or the future, but all we really truly have and will ever have is this moment right now. So that's something I think is really magical about cats. Cats and, you know, dogs and animals in general, is that they just help you be present.
I agree. Honestly, I think it's such a really valid point that, you know, I was actually only thinking that yesterday. I mean, it's something because I was like, oh gosh, you know, we've got to go for our walk. I'll worry about that after the walk. And then we're on our walk, and it was a good walk. And, you know, and I really, you know, went down a few gears of stress. And it was really great, because it was a pleasant evening. It was a really good walk with me, Prue, and Mr. Binks. Did some obedience training, and it was all really, really good connections going on, you know, and it was brilliant. And it cured me basically from being a bit stressed out about various other things that probably aren't that stressful, really. But I think, you know, as humans, we're really good at overcomplicating things, aren't we?
Totally. And actually, I just want to pick up on that word connection that you just used, because it's funny, because I think people who don't have pets can be a bit sort of like, what do you mean you have a connection with your pet? Do you know what I mean? They can't quite, and I will admit that before I had Johnny, I was probably one of those people, but one of the things that he has taught me is that, my God, you can have such a huge and meaningful and important and amazing and wonderful connection with an animal, whether it's a dog or a cat or whatever. It's crazy, isn't it? And I'm sure you have that with your dogs, but I find with Johnny that you know, you just said you the walk that you went on, you went for a really good walk, and some people might be like, well, what do you mean it was a good walk? Surely when you take your dog for a walk, it's like you just take your dog for a walk. But no, and I so know what you meant, because there are times where I've kind of hung out with Johnny of an afternoon, or we've had a particularly you know, a particularly lovely couple of hours together, and we've you know, I've really sort of connected with him on a level that, you know, that was more than the day before, which is, and it's completely incredible.
Oh, I know. And I think I'm lucky, you know, I've always known this, you know, because I grew up in a household with lots of animals, funnily enough, around, and with a big focus. Well, because Dad worked for the RSPCA, so animal conversations were always being
Yeah.
had in the home. We had a pond with fish in. I had my guinea pig Squeak, and you know, tortoises, dogs. I went for riding lessons, and it was my dad that, you know, encouraged me to ride. Well, it was mandatory, you know, so I had no choice. I had to learn how to ride a horse and saddle a pony and all that, which I loved. So I've always had that, I suppose, encouraged in me, or I naturally, you know, veered towards animals as totally having meaningful moments in time with, far
Yeah.
more often, I think, than a lot of people really, you know. But yeah, I mean, I am a bit odd in that way, I think, or maybe not, you know. But
Well, I don't think
mm,
it's odd at all. And you know, actually, when you were talking about I remember you talking about your you know, your upbringing when you were on my podcast, and just to give the listeners a bit of context about my upbringing in relation to animals, I was similar to you in that we had lots of animals. I don't think as many as you guys did, but we had a dog. And we had a cat. But the funny thing was, and so I have a brother, an older sister and a younger brother, and we had a horse too at one point that my sister and I used to ride. But we had a dog called Jumbo, who's a black Labrador, and a black cat called Ebby. And Jumbo, the dog, was officially my sister's. And it's a funny story. Well, it's not really a funny story, but it's the story as to how we came to get her. Was that my sister, when she was about 9 or 10, she was at a swimming lesson. My mum was up in the, you know, those kind of galleries in sort of, you know, swimming.
yes, in the olden days, or I
Yeah,
don't, I mean, I have,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So my mum was up in the gallery kind of chatting to the other mums, and my sister Annie was in the pool. And long story short, she did a mushroom. You know, when you're having swimming lessons and you have to kind of curl up into that mushroom shape. And I think it's called a mushroom. And anyway, she didn't come up. And basically she nearly drowned.
Oh my
And my mum and dad said to her after that, you can have anything you want. And she went, I want a dog.
God.
So we got a black Labrador when I must have been 8, because she's just over a year older than me. And I mean, she was, you know, just the absolute kind of most joyous creature on the planet. And although she wasn't officially mine, and what was funny is that my sister and I, you know, we took it very seriously that Ebony, my cat was called Ebony. Ebby was my cat and Jumbo was her dog. You know, which is just amusing to sort of think how you see things when you're kids. But what's really interesting is that when Ebby, my beloved Ebby, died when I was 19, I was absolutely devastated. We buried him in the garden in the house that I grew up, sort of outside my bedroom window. But what's interesting is that as I, you know, went off to university, and although my parents had other cats, but I then, you know, went off into the world. I went to university, I moved to London because I grew up in Dorset, And what's funny is that I, over the next 20 years, did not have an animal in my life, did not have a pet. And so I lost that connection with what it was like. I forgot how amazing it was to have a cat, in particular, and a dog. And then my sister ended up getting a cat about 2 or 3 years ago called Biscuit. And over the last couple of years, I just fell in. I see my sister a lot. She lives in London too, and so I would see Biscuit like, you know, every week, very, very, very regularly. And I basically started remembering how much I loved having a cat in my life. And so it was because of Biscuit that I sort of made the decision that I was going to get a cat, because I live, as you know, Anna, and Joe and I have talked about this on Chewing the Fat. I live in a studio flat, which is, I hasten to add, it's a beautiful, beautiful studio flat, and it's got massively high ceilings, and it's got like a mezzanine. So it's a, you know, if you're going to live in a studio flat, it's a lovely one to live in. But because I live in a studio, I always assumed that I wouldn't get an animal until I moved somewhere bigger. But then my neighbor knew somebody who's had a pregnant cat, and who'd had a litter before, and that's how I came to get Johnny. But it was just funny that I sort of completely lost that connection with animals, and then came back to it when my sister got a cat, and I was like, oh my God, I remember this feeling of like loving having a pet, you know.
It's brilliant. I think it's great because it is enriching, and particularly you work from home a lot, and it's about company, but it's about
Yeah.
company that's totally unconditional. There's no judgment, and that's what I think is the key. You know, there's no judgment about your roots might be showing, or you
Yeah.
can't fit into a certain pair of trousers or whatever. You know, hoovered. That's the key. It's kind of no psychological pressure.
Yeah, completely. You're so right. I mean, one thing though that strikes me off the back of what you just said is it's very different with cats than it is with dogs, isn't it? I mean, this is a whole conversation, the difference between cats and dogs. And actually you mentioned how Gremlin behaved a bit like a dog, and Johnny's the same. And I think it's because I've kind of trained him to, he's a very human cat. And so he's sort of, you know, he comes when I call him, and I think he's just very much more human than he is you know, than perhaps most cats, and because he's a Bengal, so he's got a very sort of big personality. But yes, I mean, there is something about animals that they're just there, and they just love you. But in the case of cats, they love you when they want to. They want, you know, when they want to come to you, they'll come to you, and when they don't want you, they will definitely let you know. But that, I think, is one of the things I love so much about cats, is that they're you know, so completely different from dogs, in as much as they're just so independent. And with Johnny, you know, he's so independent. Obviously he's a cat, and because he's a Bengal and he's an outdoor cat, you know, he's just off kind of living his best life. But then when he comes home, that's just the most amazing thing. And I've got into this routine, if I'm at home, which I am a lot, because, you know, I do work from home a lot. When I hear the cat flap go, I kind of jump up out of my chair, and I like run over to the cat flap, and I take him up in my arms, and I give him a massive hug. And I'm like, oh my God, hi darling, how are you? I mean, I literally treat this cat like I literally treat him like he's a baby. And actually, going back to the kind of child-free thing, I am finding that I'm discovering what I would have been like as a mum to a human. I basically treat him like he is a human child. Is that weird? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe not.
Well, I don't know that you do, because he's a cat and he's a Bengal. So I know it's weird, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I think you do put boundaries in with Johnny, you know, because being a Bengal, I mean, funnily enough, one of my friends is a cat behavior specialist,
Wow.
and her speciality is helping people live with Bengals,
Oh,
because they
wow.
can be so difficult. And if you haven't got a strong personality, which you have, Lucy, then the Bengals can rule the roost. Like, there was pieces in the paper that owner can't get out of her bed because the Bengal won't let the owner, you know. And there's crazy. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. Do you think they're
Yeah.
that strong-minded, Lucy, the Bengal?
Oh my gosh, Anna, I cannot. Okay, put it this way. Had I known what he was going to be like before I got him, you know, at the time in my kind of blissfully, totally free and independent single child free life, I probably wouldn't have got him. And I mean that with all the love in the world. And I wouldn't be without him now, because I'm completely in love with him. But had I known, I'd have been like, no thanks. But the funny thing was, basically, because I got Johnny through my neighbor and friend Louise, I didn't even really, and I remember actually my mum saying to me, "Oh, darling, you sure you want a Bengal? You know, they're really difficult." La, 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 la.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, be fine, be fine. And it was, and I kind of went into it quite sort of blinkered and, you know, some would say quite irresponsibly and quite stupidly, because I didn't really do the research, not least because I'm so busy with the podcast and everything else in my life that I simply didn't have the time to spend hours and hours and hours and hours researching everything about Bengals, which, you know, that I probably don't come off very well by admitting that. But anyway, the point is that, going back to your question, he absolutely is a blimmin' handful. 100%. He is the, you know, compared to your sort of average moggy house cat, he's a different animal. You know, and Bengals, obviously they're descended from Asian leopard cats. And
Mm.
I
So
see,
how wild are they, Lucy? Because, you
well,
know,
oh
I
gosh,
mean, before Gremlin arrived, you know, and moved in, yeah, I didn't go and get Gremlin. He decided to move in. You know, Bengal was something I was like, gosh, if I ever have a cat,
yeah,
which I thought I never will be able to, because at the time, Molly, my first bull terrier, really hated cats, you know. So,
right,
but I thought, oh, Bengal, amazing, you know. And my friend Debbie Connolly was a Bengal expert. So I'd heard and I thought, gosh, this is like the bull terrier of all
yeah.
cats, you know. I mean, how wild are they in terms of F1? I mean, how many generations apart from the Asian wild cat are they?
Gosh, Anna, I wish I knew the answer to that. And I'm ashamed to say that. Do you know what? I literally do not know. I mean, I know that they're descended from Asian leopard cats, but I really don't know sort of how far back it goes. Isn't that awful? And I have done some reading about this. I have sort of, since I've had Johnny, I have done some research on this, but I can't off the top of my head remember. But so what I will say is that, in my experience, not that many generations ago, because
That's brilliant, brilliant.
Johnny is like so wild. But you know what? That is what I think one of the reasons why I just love him so much is because he's a mate, he's a wonder. Do you know what I mean? He's a complete wonder to me. He's so, and yes, he's high maintenance, and yes, he meows a lot. They're very, you know, Bengals can be very, very loud, but actually the whole meowing thing, I love it because he has lots of different meows, and I know what the different meows mean, and I actually find them really fascinating. And Johnny won't meow unnecessarily unless he actually wants something. So if he's meowing, I'll know that either he wants me to play with him for a bit, or he wants food, or he wants to go out, or whatever it may be. And actually he has this more, rather than a meow, he has a yowl. Is it a yowl they call it? Those kind of very sort of guttural, sort of low
Yeah, like a
yowls.
growly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Mm.
apparently, and he sometimes does it when he goes outside, and I'll hear him outside my window doing this sort of yowl. I'm like, why are you meowing like that? And apparently it's when they see birds, for example. And oh my God, speaking of birds, Anna, this has happened twice now. Okay, so I actually I mentioned a rat situation on Chewing the Fat on Joe's show.
Oh no, gosh, we
But
hadn't.
but
Mm.
going back to birds, twice now, and Johnny is not, I know some Bengals can be really big, but Johnny is not a big cat. He's relatively small for a Bengal. Like the Moggy who he kind of hangs out with, who's partly his best mate and partly his nemesis, who's called Oreo. Oreo's like a sort of average size house cat, and Johnny is smaller than him, but also Johnny is just very lean and has, you know, much shorter hair. He's not kind of fluffy because Bengals, he's got this amazing coat which basically feels like velvet. In fact, every time anyone meets him, everyone's like, oh my God, he is. Because I even if I do say so myself, Johnny is, even by Bengal standards, absolutely stunning, like stunning. I put plenty of pictures of him on my Instagram. He really is absolutely beautiful. But the other day, I think it might have, yes, do you know what, it was yesterday. And it's happened twice now. Not only has he brought live rodents in through the cat flap, which I've then had to chase down and rescue and release, he yesterday and once before, he's tried to bring a pigeon, like a full grown pigeon, through the cat flap.
Gosh.
And to the point where I now, every time he goes out, I lock the cat flap so that he can only come back in when I let him in, because he goes through phases. But again, this is one of the things that makes Johnny so brilliant, is that an amazing hunter. And of course, he's just out there, like I say, living his best life, doing what he's programmed innately to do, which is hunt. And it's so interesting when he is in hunt mode, because the first time he tried to bring a pigeon through the window, and that time the cat flap wasn't locked from the outside, and thank God I was there, because it's a window cat flap that I have. And basically he was, I saw him and I was like, oh my God, I took a video of it because I was just so gobsmacked, and I immediately locked the cat flap and I legged it. I live in a like a huge old big massive Victorian house. I live in like a raised ground floor flat. And so I locked the cat flap, ran outside and grabbed him to sort of save this pigeon. And, you know, some might say you shouldn't do that because obviously he's wild and that's what he's innately programmed to do. But I wanted to save this pigeon. So I grabbed him, and every time I've taken him away from whichever wild animal he's kind of playing with, he loses his shit. And it's like Jekyll and Hyde, and he becomes this, you know, completely wild, and therein lies the wild side. So in answer to your question from about 10 minutes ago, I've completely gone off on one, but he really does have this incredibly wild side to him. And the other thing I'll say about Bengals is that they really are so much more high maintenance than your average house cat. And I make a real effort, and I'm very happy to really give him a lot of attention every day. So I would never recommend anyone getting a Bengal who does not have the time or the inclination or the desire to give them attention. You have to interact with them. You have to play with them. And I mean, thank God he's an outdoor cat, because obviously he gets rid of a lot of his energy when he's outside. But I do also make an effort to really interact with him and play with him, because he needs that stimulation and he needs that playtime. But all of it combined really adds up to, honestly, the most incredible cat who just fills my heart with absolute joy.
Oh no, oh gosh, you see, Debbie Connolly, the Bengal cat expert, she actually credited Gremlin as being an honorary Bengal, because
wow.
because he could be quite naughty. He was very naughty with my little Mr. Binks. I mean, he killed wild rabbits that were bigger than Mr. Binks. So when Mr. Binks arrived as a rehome, Grem was already about 4, and he was really quite bullying towards Mr. Binks, and Mr. Binks was vulnerable, so I had to get on top of it, basically. And he'd do awful things like sit on Mr. Binks's indoor kennel, and his tail just swishing as if to say, I'm just here. And so I had to ring Debbie, actually, and get cat behavior help, actually. So that was the start of a bit of a difficult relationship to sort out between Gremlin and Mr. Binks. And at one point I was going to take on a puppy English toy terrier, which I had to not do because of Gremlin, because they're very, very small when they're puppies, obviously, because he's a very small dog, Mr. Binks. So I think he would have had it.
Gosh, well,
Grem used to eat a lot of his prey, you see, as well, like whole rabbits and all sorts of things. So they sound very, I could see, that's why I think I'm interested in Johnny. I hope to meet him one day, because
I'm sure you will.
because he sounds very like Gremlin, and I love the way cats play pranks. They don't like things too serious. Grem would always try and lighten the mood by a total in the moment, right? I mean, once, oh yeah, it's a long story. He had to represent the cat, the only cat that ever got awarded a Dickin medal by the PDSA. This cat called Simon got a medal for ridding this ship in the Second World War of all their rats. And he is the only cat still to this day that has ever been awarded this great medal. And he was a tuxedo cat like Gremlin. And so Gremlin was chosen by the PDSA to represent Gremlin on their, I think it was their 75th anniversary. Anyway, long story short, Gremlin, of course, gets himself on BBC Breakfast. And then we have to stand really near to a horse, because there was a horse, a pigeon, a dog there, all the people, animals rather, that won the Dickin medal, representatives of, and the press photographers were going, right, we want the cat nearer the horse. And I'm like, really? And the horse really wasn't happy about it. And Gremlin was going, horse or zebra. This is an interesting creature. And he was like staring at the horse like so much. And the horse was going, don't eyeball me. I was getting rid. And I was right close to the horse. I was thinking, oh, I mean, I don't mind horses. I'm okay about them. But I could see this horse was particularly stressed out by Gremlin. So I was so glad when that shoot ended. I think we just got away with it before chaos ensued. Gremlin broke free from my arms. Horse reared up, threw the rider onto the ground. You know, can you imagine? But it was all kind of imminent. But anyway, we got back from that, and this is so extraordinary. And then we might leave it here. So I let Gremlin out of his carrier, and he goes out, and then I'm on the phone, and he comes in, and I'm like, "What have you got, Gremlin?" And I thought, oh, that's all right. It's dead. I don't normally didn't mind if you brought dead animals in because they're easier to deal with than ones that are alive. But no,
Totally.
to my horror, it was a rat. It was as though he was channeling Simon, this famous cat that killed loads of rats. And he'd gone out within about 10 minutes. He'd found a rat and brought it into the flat, Lucy. And I was going out that evening, and the rest of the day, it was sorting out someone to come round, you know, and then this rat catcher man came round, and Grem was sat on the kitchen top because the rat just obviously went behind the washing machine. And the rat catcher was like, is he there because of the rat? And I went, yeah. He won't leave that position until he's finished the rat. 'Cause that Gremlin did actually finish everything he started. But anyway, and this rat catcher was like, I can't believe it. The amount of cats, you know, homes that I have to go to with cats, and their cats are absolutely hopeless. So I think in a way it's good if you ever have a mouse problem, which I hope you don't, but you know that you've got the man in the flat to sort it out. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, Anna. I cannot tell you how. Do you know what is hilarious? Is that having a conversation about rats, rats have become a thing that I have had to actually get used to because of Johnny. Because
Oh,
I'm not kidding you. Like, this is no word of a lie. So Johnny turned 1 on the 7th of May. And that was the week before the coronation, I seem to remember. And he's had a cat flap, I think, since about February, I think I got it. But anyway, so weekend of coronation, for the first time ever, he came in through the cat flap with something in his mouth, and I was like, oh my God. And it was a baby rat.
mm.
And to cut a very long and very disturbing story short, since May, where are we now? The middle of August, I have had to deal with, I'm not kidding you, double figure number of rats, including adult rats,
Oh,
live adult rats in my flat that he's brought in through the cat flap, which is why, as I said earlier, I now keep it locked from the outside so that he can only come in when I let him in. So when I hear him scratching, I have to let him in because it's just got too much. And so, but I kind of laugh to myself because, you know, I would never, like, if someone had said to me, you know, how would you feel about dealing with a live rat in your flat? I'd have been like, well, clearly that's not going to happen because I would just die. Not that I have a particular phobia of rats, but like, who the hell likes rats, especially not live ones? And it made me laugh just then when you said about you're okay with kind of dead animals. And I'm exactly the same. Him bringing a dead animal, like decapitated animal, would not even faze me because I'd be like, oh, great, it's dead. I can just like get rid of it. Easy peasy. It's when they're alive that you got a freaking problem. And honestly, Anna, I cannot tell you, he's brought in multiple baby rats and at least 3 or 4 full grown adult rats that I have had to, but the hilarious thing is that I've become a total expert on rat catching. It's like I'm the freaking Pied Piper of Hamelin. So I have a trick where I have this, what I call the rat towel, or I used to before I started locking the cat flap from the outside, but I have a towel at the ready at all times. And what I would do is basically if and when he brought one in, the way that I would deal with it, or I find the best way, anyone listening, the best way to deal with a live rat in your house is get a towel, chuck the towel over the rat or the mouse or whatever it is. And then I would get my mop buckets and get the rat, which kind of gets stunned underneath the towel, into the mop bucket. And then that is how I would then get the thing outside and then take it, you know, significantly far away so that Johnny wouldn't then immediately go out and get it again, because that's what he would do.
That's such good advice. I
But
mean,
I swear the towel thing is the way forward. A towel or a blanket that is already disgusting, you don't mind being even more disgusting.
but they
Shove
move
it over it.
fast,
They are so fast.
and
They
the
are so
problem,
fast.
the problem
But
is
that's the terror. That's the worry. It's like, I don't care about dead ones, but when they're live, it's like, I've got to, if you don't catch it and it escapes, then you got a problem. That's the scary thing. So get a towel.
if you can catch it, because, well, in my experience of it happening, they've gone, you know, behind the washing machine, you know, that's happened. Yeah. But no, I know, gosh, the stories I could tell you, but I think that's fun, you know. I mean, it keeps you in the moment, and it's a great distraction, and it's about building memories and sharing experiences. You know, I think I mentioned on your podcast when Grem brought in a squirrel alive when Prudence was in intensive care for the weekend, and as if it was like, there you go, this will keep you guys busy, no time to get all wallowing in the mire, you've got a project, how to get the squirrel out from under your bed and back out into the garden. It was almost like he really was trying to pull our legs. And I think that's also the funny thing. And that's also quite Bengal, I believe, you know, being one step ahead of the human. Lucy, gosh, we could talk for ages, but look,
I know.
No, I just have to meet Johnny now. So I'm looking forward to that. That's something really that's going to be very exciting. And yes, please keep me posted. And I just think what you're doing and promoting that it's okay, you know, it's good, in fact, to be single and, you know, developing your own self with like-minded people and preserving energy and putting it out there in a very concentrated, positive way is excellent.
Thanks, Anna. I really appreciate that. You know, as you all know, having a podcast is a journey, to say the least. And I do 2 episodes a week. I do, just for anyone who may be interested in listening, I do a Tuesday guest episode, which is obviously what you were on, my Tuesday episode, and then every Saturday. And that's always or largely centered around the single and child-free aspect. But then on Saturdays, I do a shorter mini-sode, which is just like a solo episode where I talk. And that's where I tend to kind of really lean into the sort of personal growthy side of things. Like I did, you know, I've done one on fear, I've done one on courage. I talk about all, you know, confidence or whatever it may be. And I do also talk on the minisodes sometimes about single issues. But what I love about the minisode actually is that I can kind of go away from the single child free element of the podcast and just talk about stuff that really lights me up about, you know, life stuff that kind of could be applicable to anyone. But no, I appreciate your very kind words, because yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, I know, but it's great when, you know, you get the good feedback and everything. But Lucy, I think you're doing a great thing, and I'm just so honored to have met you, and I hope we will do a Chewing the Fat together again at some point in the not so distant future as well.
Gosh, Anna, I feel exactly the same way about having met you, and I'm damn sure that Jo will get us back on together at some point. I really, really hope she does. And definitely I want you to meet Johnny, so we're going to have to make it happen. And I want to meet your dogs as well. But yes, thank you so much for having me on. And seriously, I'm really grateful, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
That's our show, Mr. Binks. What did you think? Yes, I know we talked a lot about cats, but you know how much cats mean to me, particularly Gremlin, and I think Johnny Depp is quite a lot like our Gremlin. And you're right, it is time for Woof of the Week. Cats versus dogs. Well, they each have their role to play in what is the web of humanity. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, go on, rate and review the show wherever you tune into your podcasts. Thanks again, of course, to Lucy Meggeson for joining us today, and all the links are, yes, in the show notes. Thanks, of course, to Mike Hansen for all the music and production as ever. Find out more about Mike at Pod People UK. And for me, check me out. I'm just at Anna Webb Dogs. What's that, Mr. Binks? Yes, you're right. We will be back in your feed next Sunday. So why don't you subscribe now? That way you'll never miss another show. Bye for now.